Welcome, everybody, to the Boaters Podcast. Today, we're hanging out with Captain Jan, the digital marketing manager at newwiremarine.com. And as most of you that have watched anything that I've ever made know that I do like newwiremarine.com. They make awesome panels. If you're doing a dash or a retrofit on your boat, definitely check them out. And he's also a founding member and previous owner of MicroSkiff.com, which is what we're going to get into today and basically be learning all about these MicroSkiffs and all the things that go on with it. So just to start things off, Jan, something I like to do to try and let everybody get to know you a little bit better. I like to know, what your first boat was, and then also what was the worst experience that you had with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me here today. Talk about small boats, kind of a real big passion of mine. Wow, my first boat. I don't know, if you're old enough like me, and you might remember the old sunflower sailboats. They're bright yellow, had a sail with a big sunflower on them. That was really sort of my first boat, and it's amazing what you could do with that. You take the sail off, put a couple paddles on it, throw your fishing tackle in it, and you could absolutely get out there and a little pond or whatever, go fishing on it. The worst experience would probably be falling out of a boat. It happened a few times, but two that really come to mind. One was actually in that Sunfisher. I was out on a little lake with, at the time, my girlfriend, but ended up my wife now. We've been together for, oh my gosh, we've been together
Uh-oh.
for over 30 years, married for 20 something more than I want to admit. So we'll just go ahead and edit that part out. No,
You had to
but,
get yourself in trouble
but
in here, huh?
yeah, exactly. And I actually fell out of that boat and hit my head.
Oh,
Um,
no.
and it was one of those where I just like kind of incapacitated, and I sort of came to looking at, I kind of woke up underneath the boat looking at the rudder of the boat. Um, that was not a good situation. So, you definitely want to make sure you're always wearing your PFD, especially in small boats. Another time falling off of a boat, which if anybody has been shallow water fishing, poling a boat, if you've been doing it long enough, you will have done this, which is you're up on the push pole, the boat moves forward, the pole gets stuck, submerged in mud, whatever it is. The boat goes this way, you go that way. And I had to literally push the boat, quickly push the boat out from underneath me from the poling platform because the engine is trimmed up. If I would have fallen, I would have fallen right onto the lower unit.
Ooh.
Um, so yeah, I landed in about 8 inches, 10 inches of water, and then had to slog my way back into the boat. This was on a particularly cold February that we were vacationing over on Matlacha, which is over by Pine Island, which Hurricane Ian really took a hit to that area. But that was years ago, and it was really cold. I got soaking wet, and I had to get back on the boat, get off the shallow flat, and run back to the little cabin that we had rented to stay in because the hypothermia had started to set in. So it was, I think,
Wow.
falling out of a boat. Those were the two worst experiences. So stay in the
And
boat.
then it just had to be into freezing water.
Yes. Yeah. It couldn't be in
Oh,
the summer where it would be warm. No, it was in the freezing cold winter.
that one's probably the second. The cold water, well, the hypothermia, that's no joke. But the hitting your head, like that one's up there, and one of the worst ones that I've heard so far, as far as like accidents, stuff like that. But yeah, because I could, that's a real big problem. If you fall out of the boat, hit your head, and like you're not wearing your PFD or something, like that's a serious situation there. That yeah, that's no
Yeah.
good coming from that.
No good comes from
So,
that. Two things. I mean, two things that from a safety standpoint that I'm passionate about. One is a kill switch, because that can save lives, and the
mhm.
other one is some sort of PFD. Today, we moved. Kind of we had talked earlier. We moved up here to Charleston, South Carolina, back in July of last year. And one thing that I'm getting used to compared to living my entire life in South Florida, Florida man, born and raised, is tides and current. And they're no joke up here. And I would not want to fall out of a boat up here because you can swiftly get removed from your boat. And so yeah,
Mm.
kill switch and PFD saves lives.
Yeah.
That's my safety. I've done my safety lecture for the day.
Well, I mean, we are talking about smaller boats because, I mean, and that's something, we're going to get into this, but on a smaller boat, because that's what you always see. You always see, oh, here's a 16-foot boat, got a 250 on the back. The thing's doing 95 miles an hour. Like they're for whatever reason that the small boat, you always see that one guy that like, yeah, we can put a 300 on that when it's like, no, no, like, but okay, so for those of us that aren't that familiar with this, because this is, my world's not really the micro skiff world. So what is a micro skiff? I mean, is it a boat? Is it a brand? Is it a lifestyle, a niche? What is it exactly that whenever you guys are saying micro skiff?
Yeah, so microskiff as a description, microskiff as a noun, if you will, um, kind of came up in early 2000s. So I'll kind of describe what it is and then kind of give the history behind it a little bit, and then
Okay.
how it connects to boating in general. So generally speaking, the actual definition of microskiff, and a lot of people kind of use it how they feel they want to. Some brands will pick up and say they have a microskiff, but the historic definition is a lightweight skiff generally used for shallow water navigation. So shallow draft, lightweight skiff that's used in flats, estuaries, backwaters, creeks, that type of stuff. Generally speaking, it's 18 feet and less,
Okay.
25 or really 30 horsepower and less, because as you've seen with four strokes, the 25 and the 30 are basically the same engine. They just, quote, tune one differently. But so it's 18 feet and less, 25 to 30 horsepower and less, narrow beams, usually 70-inch beams or less.
Hmm.
And they're meant for shallow water, poling, shallow water fishing, backwaters, estuaries. They're usually very lightweight construction. And historically, they are fiberglass construction.
Okay.
So, a little bit different than, say, an aluminum boat, a John boat, but we'll kind of get into that because I think there's some crossovers happening. So that is the traditional, that is the definition. And that definition actually came out of microskiff.com. So kind of the history, where did microskiff.com come from? So a good friend of mine, Tom, who he was actually a member of a very popular forum at the time, and it still has a very good membership, the GNU forum. Now, a GNU is a type
Ah,
of microskiff,
okay. Because I
shallow
like
water,
news. I like
narrow,
news.
typically 25, 30 horsepower and less, fiberglass.
Mm-hmm.
And the history behind the GNU is actually really interesting. The gentleman who designed it worked at NASA and designed the skiff. So there's a whole like history behind the GNU, which is actually very fascinating.
Uh-huh.
But Tom had kind of said, "Hey, look, there's this world outside of just the GNUs. There's this other world of small skiffs. Well, micro skiffs. They're not a full big skiff, right? So they're not a flats boat. I admittedly own what would be more traditionally considered a flats boat. I have a 16-foot egret flats boat with a 90 horsepower and a poling platform and a trolling motor and electronics and all the stuff that really is sort of antithetical to a micro skiff. But
Oh.
but the microskiff forum came about, and so Tom had created it, and I and a bunch of other people kind of became sort of the founding members of it, and through the community, through the boating community. We came up with this definition. So it's not like the definition was there in the encyclopedia or the dictionary. We really kind of created this definition of what a microskiff is. And there's always people, well, yeah, but what if? Realistically, 18 feet and less, 25, 30 horsepower and less, narrow beams, 70 or so inches and less,
Mm-hmm.
fiberglass construction, meant for shallow waters, protected waters, flats, estuaries, backwater country stuff. That's really sort of the starting point for microskiff. And what we've seen, and certainly what I've seen over the years is that MicroSkiff has kind of evolved to include pretty much anything that somebody wants to slap the label to it and try to brand it as, quote, a microskiff to fit in that genre. But really, that is the true definition.
Out of curiosity, do you know what the beam is on your flats boat?
It's not 70 inches.
It's bigger than, yeah.
Uh, it's beamy. It's wide.
Yeah.
She's got some displacement to her.
Cause that one really, I think that, well, it sounds like, okay, one, the engine size, and then two, the beam. Like that's like the real separator, because you think of a Hughes, a Maverick, the Egret, these are these flats boats, but the key thing is that, that 18 Hughes might have a 150 on it. Like,
Oh yeah.
your Egret, you said it was a 16, it's got a 90 on it.
Yep.
So, but like
And
you said, it's wide.
it's wide, and it also has a lot of dead rise, right? So the egret has,
Okay. Okay.
don't quote me, I think between 11 to 13 degrees of dead rise all the way at the stern, which makes it a great riding boat. I mean, in
Yeah.
chop, this
Oh
is the boat
yeah.
you want to be on.
Yeah.
A microskiff traditionally will have almost zero dead rise.
Really?
A good example of what probably most people would consider a flats boat or a flats skiff that is really kind of really fits sort of the genre or the niche of microskiffs was the old Hells Bay Gladesman. Now, the Gladesman was about 18 feet and less. It was about a 25 horsepower. It was a narrow
Hmm.
beam. It wasn't like the Waterman. The Waterman had a wider beam, but it also had nearly 0 degree dead rise at the stern. So again, it's meant to float shallow, which you compromise other things, right? So you're going to compromise ride in, say, the worst conditions.
Yeah.
The intent is that you're not out crossing Tampa Bay in it. You're in the backwaters of the estuaries.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I do like a Hell's Bay. I think their flats boat. I like that. I like a Dolphin. A Dolphin makes a good flats boat. But yeah, that engine also, with the four strokes, which I think we will get into some of the weight things here. But because like a four stroke, that 25, those things are like 120 pounds or something. So like that would, I'm sure, plays a big part in, you think about a 90 horsepower four stroke. That's not a light engine. So
No.
you need that 70 plus beam to be able to support that kind of weight on the back of the boat. But I didn't realize that the flat bottom was kind of one of the characteristics of it.
Generally speaking, now if you think about where it comes from, so if you go back in history, a lot of what would now be called modern flat skiffs or flats microskiff, excuse me, a modern microskiff came from a lot of the very shallow running boats that were used in um, you know 50, 60 years ago. So again, it's protected waters, very shallow running, shallow draft, floating. And
Hmm.
even think about, so really the popularity of four-stroke engines changed boating in a lot of different positive ways, but one of the
Yeah.
negative ways is the weight. You go
Yeah.
back to a 15-inch shaft Mercury two smoker 25. You could pick that up. One person could easily pick that up and carry it and put it on the back of a lightweight skiff, and it wouldn't have a significant impact on draft or balance or all of those other things. And
Hmm.
certainly, as small four stroke engines like the 25 and 30s became popular, it it really kind of caused boat manufacturers to change how they design their boats, because while it's the same power, same shaft horsepower, the
Hmm.
weights went way
Yeah.
overboard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're starting to dial that in a little bit with some of the newer stuff, but yeah, no, definitely. Then okay, then a good question would be is the branding then? So like if we're ruling out all these boats that are 70 plus, all the flats boats. So we're talking, Dolphins, Hells Bays, Mavericks, Hughes, the Egrets, all these flats boats, those are out of the picture. So what would your top five brands of boats that would be considered a microskiff be?
So strictly within the confines of the definition of microskiff. There are a few boat manufacturers out there that still build boats that fit it or are really, really close. Um,
Okay.
and in really no particular order, other than just being kind of alphabetical, because I kind of figured you were going to ask this question, so I'm going to do this alphabetically. There's no brand allegiance here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
you
yeah.
know, starting at A, Ancona. So Ancona used to
Ancona, okay.
have, and they may still have, and honestly, I kind of probably should know this better. A couple of boats that really sort of fit that microskiff. Now they got bigger boats that certainly are bigger than that, but I think that's, to me, one of the brands that still kind of maintains a lot of that uh, DNA of what a microskiff is. So Ancona, Beavertail, they have some narrow
Mm,
beam skiffs. East Cape, I know of two of their boats one specifically that certainly would fit in that microskiff region, still have some of that DNA, though, in my opinion, I think with a 30, they'd be slightly underpowered, but you could still
yeah.
do that. Ginu, I think Ginu, if you really
Oh,
want to
yeah.
talk about what was the one brand that has truly fits the DNA, the definition, and really has a more history. Again, they
Hmm.
go way back. Ginu is one of those brands that absolutely has the highest amount of the DNA. Hell's Bay, they had the skate for a while, which I don't think they do anymore. They have the, oh, Chris is probably gonna kill me if I pronounce this right. I think it's the Eldora, which is their small, lightest one. I believe that one's got a lot of the original DNA that would say it's a microskiff. Salt marsh skiff, certainly that's one. So I think those are going to be like examples of brands that have what would traditionally be considered a microskiff, or very, very close. Outside of that, there are other smaller niche players that I've seen pop up here and there. There's some that pop up with, roto molded something that they're calling a microskiff. And I'm like, no, that's really not a microskiff if you think of, of the wording. But I mean, strictly as a brand label, those would be some of the brands that probably have the closest thing to what we would consider a microskiff today. And I'm sure all of your viewers are going to chime in the comment section, but you forgot.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Or if you
Well,
really want
that
to start a flame war, start saying that's not a microskiff, boy, you'll get
well,
lots of
I tried to give
comments.
you an out. I tried to give you a number of fives to give you the out.
Yeah.
But so you can kind of like, it's almost like how customizable is it to where like you can buy just a straight up microskiff, but you almost are like buying older boats that fit that have, here's the well, not the mold, but here's the hull, and you kind of like make your, I guess, customize your own. You see more people buying like a brand new type microskiff, or is it pretty much kind of like people are, because everything is gone, everything like you said, with the four strokes and everything, the widths had to come out, and like, everybody wants more speed. Everybody wants, a 24-inch Garmin with the chirp and all that stuff. So like, with that kind of pushed, it kind of like almost you don't have that many that are still making models outside like a Ginu. Ginu's haven't really changed all that much, but
Yeah.
what do you think it's more customizable or still go buy them?
It's so that's a great question, and I think there's a couple of things there. First, looking at trends. Certainly, at the time that Microskiff came out, the microskiff.com came out, and we started gaining a lot more popularity. And certainly, when I owned it, building the brand, we were also in that 2005, 2007, 2008-ish time frame. So what was going on there? Well, people still wanted to go fishing, but there was certain, economic things that people were concerned about. And, so our whole, when I branded microskiff.com, so I acquired microskiff.com from Tom, and I grew the brand for many, many years, and then ultimately I actually sold it to a larger brand that has multiple forums and things like that. But in that time that I was branding it and growing the brand and doing that and kind of growing MicroSkiff, we had this mantra. We had sort of a motto, which was do more with less. And it was really interesting because our members were coming up with these really interesting, neat, unique ideas on how they could take a very simple boat, low horsepower, and still get out on the water and fish and enjoy it and have their family on it, and do it very cheap. So a lot of the products that you see today, in 2025, come from some of these guys that had the little boats that just started making interesting, unique things, and now they're you buy these products. So now let's fast forward to 2024, 2025. What do we see? So certainly there are some economic things that are currently going on, but as a general rule, people are spending more money. Cost of trucks have gone up. I mean, you just saw it. I saw it. I was at Miami Boat Show also with you, and a name brand 18-foot flats boat sale
70
price,
grand.
show price
Yeah.
was only $90,000. I remember when a flats boat was $20,000.
Uh-huh.
So back in my day, so things have changed. But we what I see is that people like the allure of the microskiff. They thought of shallow running and shallow poling, and then proceed to put 2.5 tons of batteries and trolling motors in the 24-inch Garmin
Hmm.
and the power pole and twin power poles and so you're almost defeating the purpose. Which it's kind of funny because again, I don't own a microskiff. I love small boats. I have a passion for small boats. Always have. Whoops, sorry about that. I
Yeah,
knocked
that's fine.
knocked my desk there. Always have. But I also want the trolling motor. I want the power pole. After a while, it becomes this like evil cycle. It's like, but I want more. I want to put the sea deck, and I want to put this, and everything you do, especially on a small boat,
Yep.
impacts everything, performance, all of that.
Well, your draft, you're going lower and lower. You can get less and less farther back to where you're like the original purpose of the microsift, so I can get
Exactly.
there. I want to go there, and you
Yep.
can't, you can't go there no more because you got too much stuff in your boat.
Exactly. So, you got to start figuring out what do you want to leave at home. And what we have seen, or what we've seen for a few years now, is two boat families. I have my
Mm.
20 something foot bay boat for the days that I want to go out with the family, hit the sandbar,
Hmm.
that type of stuff. But then I also have this super stripped down, really sleek, East Cape Glide, for example. You could do an East Cape Glide tiller with a 30 and get out there on the water and get into really, really shallow water. And
Hmm.
that's kind of what we're seeing, is that, as at least what I'm seeing in the industry, is that you have more people doing that. Or something that I think is kind of unique. There's two interesting subsets within the microskiff world when it comes to the boats. You have the people that are going to go out and buy something new, or which that's one subset. But the two
Yeah.
other subsets are, I'm going to buy something used and customize it. So I'm going to go out and buy it, a used name brand here, and I'm going to remove this, remove that. I've seen several old Watermans where people have gone out and bought some really clapped out Watermans, 16-foot Watermans that, wow. I mean, first of all, I can't believe how much you're spending on a Waterman that's the old
You
school
paid
Chris
money for
Morjon
that?
design, built Hell's Bay from 19 whatever to 2000 whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, you spent how much on that clapped out Hell's Bay? Okay, but then they gut it and they rebuild it, and they're just stunningly beautiful. And they still hold that mantra of being simple,
Hmm.
lightweight, efficient. Um, and they get out on the water and they do that. The other one, which is really interesting, and I really have to give credit where credit is due here. So a little bit of history behind Hell's Bay is that Hell's Bay was basically a collaboration between Chris Morjon, who really knows boat design. He's really a sailboater.
Okay.
I've had the wonderful opportunity to speak to him and learn a lot from him. Flip Pallet and Hal Chittum, they basically created this thing called Hell's Bay. And there's a lot of stories behind it, and I'm not going to get into that. But Chris, after Hell's Bay, he went on to do some other things. Well, now what he does is he designs a lot of home build plans. So one of the other silos that's really interesting right now is you see a lot of people building MicroSkiffs, small, lightweight, shallow running boats that are Chris Morjon designs. You can buy the plans from him. There are companies that will CNC cut the stanchions, and in your garage, not my garage, but in your garage, maybe you can build a skiff that honestly looks almost exactly like Hell's Bay because it's his
Wow.
designs. And that's something that we're seeing. So next to people just going out and buying the boats, there are people who buy old ones and do some just amazing killer stuff with them, really neat ideas. And then there's this huge growing population of small boat micro skiffers, if you will, that are building them at home. And it is so cool to see, they come up with ideas. They have these, well, I really don't want my boat to have blank, but I need something else. And it's really cool in the community to just watch that, because there's just this huge excitement around the brands and excitement about what they're doing and watching people build these boats. And it's really cool. It's
Yeah, it's
just neat,
almost.
for me, because I love small boats.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there that I always look at things like, if you like something, then there's probably another thousand or there's however many people else that are also going to be interested in that thing. And then it's kind of like, kit cars there's still a lot of people I think that build, kit cars, or like, you know, which I don't think this would be really a kit that you like buy and like piece it together. You're actually kind of like getting the CNC parts and like fabricating and putting it together. So you're actually going to have a lot more connection with the boat, because now you've got the pride of, I built, hey, where'd you get, that's a really nice looking boat. Where'd you get that? I built it in my garage, like,
Exactly. And some of these
like, oh,
builds are
wow.
just, I have to give them props, because most of these people have never built a boat before.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and between forums and YouTube and everything else, there's a tremendous support network out there that they can begin to do that. And that's one of the things that I think has been really exciting to see. And I'm really excited that Chris has kind of created this world where I can build at home my own, and I hate to use the brand name Hell's Bay, but it is his design.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, it's really, really neat. And again, one guy, well, I'm 65 years old and I want to do this, so I'm going to lay out my boat one way. And another person, well, I've got two
Hmm.
young kids, so I'm going to do something different. And they really built it to suit their specific needs. And that's cool. That's really, really cool. I give them props, because I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to ask you about some of the customizations and stuff that people do, like upgrade stuff. But I'm now that we're talking about this kit thing, I'm wondering, do you know the average time that it takes someone to, or have you seen like an average time that it takes someone to build one of these things?
Yes, I have seen it. So we have to define time as two different ways. Time being the date they started, the date they finished, and then time being how much actual time it took to build it, because
Yeah, yeah.
it's not linear.
Yeah. Obviously there's a big difference of, if you're 70 trying to build this and you've, retired, versus I'm 45 working a job, and, you've got
Nights
Saturday
and
for,
weekends,
yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Thanksgiving if your wife is nice, that type of thing. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say that in general, based on what I've seen, builds that have been published on MicroSkiff that have been shared, right? So there are many people that have built these boats and never come to MicroSkiff and
Yeah.
share their builds. But the people
Right.
that have been on MicroSkiff, I would say that roughly the average date start to date end, again, not physical labor time, usually about 6 months. I've seen some that have taken longer, some that have taken not quite as long. And that's
Mhm.
really boat into the water component, right? So the hull is
Right.
done. Maybe the cap isn't completely finished, but at least the boat's in the water. They slap a little outboard on it. They tool around and they're like, "Yay, my boat's done!" And really, it's not.
Right.
But I would say probably 6 months.
That's not that long, honestly, because,
It's
well,
not. It really isn't.
yeah,
But I've seen
depending
some that
on,
take much longer.
oh yeah, I could, yeah, I could bet, I definitely, you could see, well, it's year six. I mean,
Yeah.
like you're not really doing that, but at 6 months, and I'm sure, like obviously, depending on your situation, with more time and more dedication, you could probably do it way quicker. But
Yeah.
depending on where you live, that's a winter project. Like, that's the if your boating season in the rivers and the lakes that you're at are, 4 or 5 months from November to May or June, like that's a winter project, I guess you could say, to do something like
Yeah.
that. You know,
We've seen a few. There's a few people that are in, say, the Northeast or central areas of the country that have built them. Most traditionally are in the Southeast United States. So,
okay.
the Gulf state, the Gulf states, Florida, and then kind of up the East Coast. I would say mostly it's Southeast United States is where I see most of the builds. But
Hmm.
I've also seen builds from around the world. There, builds down in Australia that are using his plans or even not his plans, but building small. There's a member on MicroSkiff from I believe it's Brazil, and he's building a
Wow.
little MicroSkiff. Now it's his own little design, and he comes on to MicroSkiff sharing what he's done, but he's also learning
Hmm.
from others. So MicroSkiff is not just Southeast United States; it literally is global. And watching
Right.
people around the globe that build boats or do things in shallow water has really been amazing.
What would be the most common modification or like upgrade that you see people doing to these kinds of boats?
Assuming the boat came boat motor trailer and a polling platform. So let's just assume that is the default already there. What do they add later? The number one thing I would say is some type of charting system, GPS. In the southeast, especially Florida, the Florida Marine Trails or the FMT chart is probably the most popular one out there for all the right reasons. I actually gave my FMT chart to a good friend of mine and said, "Here, you use it, get all you can out of it, enjoy it. It's going to be great for you." Because when I moved up here to South Carolina, there are no Florida Marine Trails. Which I was like, "Oh man, I got to figure out this water on my own." Oh man, that sucks. But I would say that's probably one of the first things, right? So it's going to be the electronics because it's going to be GPS. Sounders a little bit, but not so much. It's really going to be the GPS. Second thing, trolling motors. While it's great to have this shallow boat that you can pole and everything else, when you're by yourself standing on the platform, you have all of the weight at the stern. It's not practical. You can pull the boats backwards. I've done that myself, where I stand on the bow and pull the boat backwards, pushing it backwards. It's a little bit more difficult. Boats weren't really designed to be pulled that way. But it's possible. I've done it multiple times where I didn't have a trolling motor. But I would say those are probably the two number one things that people will usually add or buy, or the number one purchases. Again, assuming the boat doesn't have it, assuming the boat is a boat, motor, trailer, and a polling platform.
Right, right, yeah, because you kind of want to strip everything down. I'm realistically, I'm sure it's a really big thing to have lithium now. I mean, where you can get a battery on the boat and it not weigh another 100 pounds that you're adding to your boat that adds that weight to it. Well, actually, let me ask you that. So,
Yeah, this is an
well,
interesting topic for small, lightweight boats.
well, I mean, I'm not gonna, we're not gonna get into the whole lithium and all that kind of stuff, but like, um, how far, so on normally, I'm guessing it's pretty much like we're talking about rivers, we're talking about flats, stuff like that. What's the distance you usually would go in the boat to like get to your spots? Like, is it relatively close to the ramp, or we're talking, a decent travel?
I would say based on the average micro skiffer, and this is taking into account that there's a lot of people that will make long runs. Certainly for myself, it is not. When I lived in Florida, when I lived in South Florida, and I fished out of Flamingo and 10,000 Islands in the backcountry, it was
Hmm.
not uncommon to run 30 to 70 miles in a day.
Oh wow, yeah, so
So
that's a
it's
distance.
it is. It's a lot of distance. I mean, if you put in, you make the round trip. If you put in, say, down in Flamingo, you put in on the outside ramp, you run out in the Florida Bay, and you run all around East Cape, all the way up to Shark River, and you come Shark River back into the backcountry, you can easily do 70 plus miles easily. If you are in Isla Morada and you want to run back into,
Up to Flamingo.
up into Florida Bay, easy 30, 40, 50 miles. Not kind of setting that aside, you get into more of the protected areas. So maybe like, um, up Titusville or Vero or stuff.
Yeah.
You might only run two or three on the outboard. You might only run 2 or 3, 4, 5 miles, maybe 10 miles in a day. So it's very efficient, right? You got a lightweight 4-stroke tiller. You're not burning much gas at all, and then you get
Hmm.
up to your flats. And then if you're two people on a boat, you'll trade poling, right? But if you're one person, maybe you want to use a trolling motor. So I would say from a distance standpoint, most microskiffers probably will run under 10 to 15 miles on an average day as an average trip. Again, taking into the extreme. Some people put in and, don't even turn on the engine. They troll to their first spot and start fishing. I got a friend of mine who lives
Yeah.
over on the East Coast. He can, the West Coast, Estero Bay. He can just like go out, put the boat in, turn the trolling motor on, and start fishing. But then there's the other extreme, right? If you want to run a small boat, which I've done, we used to have rallies where we would put the boats in at Flamingo, and then we would actually run the boats all the way to Isla Morada as a big rally, a big group.
That's like 40 miles right there.
Yeah,
Or
so
no,
so
it's
I
a
mean,
little bit less.
yeah, there's all extremes, but in general, I would say 10 or 15 miles or less total round trip for the entire day on the outboard,
Hmm.
not on the trolling motor. Now, the trolling motor might be completely different. There have
Right.
been days where I'll go 6 miles on a trolling motor easily. Going up and down channels and following mangrove lines and things like that. So it's different. And what's interesting, the batteries. I want to talk about the batteries real briefly because it is interesting around the lithium. Traditionally speaking, on a micro skiff, not a flats boat. Flats boat, like I have a 24-volt trolling motor, so I've got a 24-volt lithium battery on there with a standard AGM for the house and outboard. But on a micro skiff, especially the smaller engines, you can use the smaller motorcycle sized AGM batteries to start the engines.
Ah,
They
okay.
do require
Okay.
less. So you don't need the big group 24, group, 30,
Right,
31, whatever
right.
batteries. You
You're not running
can
a 1K transducer and a stereo.
exactly, so you can get away with the smaller batteries for the most part with the small 4 strokes. And then you can put a 12-volt trolling motor on there with a 12-volt lithium battery. And then you're really not adding a significant amount of weight to the boat
Hmm.
other than what a
Right.
trolling motor weighs today, which they can be pretty heavy. So
Yeah.
it's not that bad. I mean, if you fish alone, a trolling motor and a lithium battery, I will venture to say weigh less than the average second angler on the boat. So you might still get into shallower water.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's the speed you're normally running at?
Mid
with the
20s.
mid 20s? Okay, okay.
Mid
So
20s. I think that's a good average 3/4 to maybe wide open throttle, depending on how much weight the boat is and also the
mhm.
design of the boat. How much wetted surface is in the water when it's up on plane. certainly with, small boats, lightweight, low horsepower, they're not going to have, running pads and things like that. And if they're very flat on the bottom, they'll kind of stick to the water. So most of them, I would say mid 20s. And of course, you always
Okay.
have the cowboy out there that says he can do 45 in his microskiff with a 25
Yeah,
horsepower.
There's always that guy.
There's always that
Because
guy. And he's going to comment down in the comments below.
yeah, because honestly, thinking of these distances, this is like one of those areas where I am not, electric guy. Like I think that electric has its space, as far as like actual power for the engine, like actual outboard, not just the trolling motor, but the actual outboard for the engine. This is maybe one of those uses where electric might actually make more sense, mainly because you could probably get speed and you could, well, it all depends because the batteries weigh a lot. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, does it really have a chance in this area or does it really not? It's that
So
it's
if you,
left up to be,
yeah, it's so if you take a look, and you were just at the Miami Boat Show, I was just there too. There were a couple of manufacturers that had electric outboards. I'm
mhm.
not going to pick on any particular one, but in general, they're about 6 kilowatts. The average, what I saw, the average electric outboard that you could or would hang onto a small microskiff, they're about 6 kilowatts, I believe, which is about, I think, 9-ish horsepower. So if you think about
Ah,
that, if you take
yeah,
that weight, because you got to have batteries, and yes, you can get the lithium and go 48 volts and everything else. But if you take all of that, how much does that package weigh for not what it essentially is 9 horsepower? Now it's neat,
mhm.
it's great. I think this is really exciting technology, but you want to talk about having range anxiety. You know,
Well, not only that, but like, are you planing out with the 9 horse? I mean, like, it's
yeah,
nine, going from a 25 to a nine is, I mean,
they
okay,
can.
if we're
They
talking
will.
25 to 20,
Yeah. Okay. So planing out versus getting good top speed. A small micro skiff. You can plane out at 12 to 15 miles an hour. You can get that boat
hmm,
up on plane. Small lightweight skiff done right, probably 12 to 15 miles an hour. It's easily up on plane. But now that you're up on plane, you're not really with an electric engine motor. You're not really going to gain any more speed.
no,
Where with
no,
25 horsepower, you get up on plane. Now we
you
give it
got
the rest
more
of the goose,
RPM
and
band.
so
Yeah.
it's exciting. It's neat. I love watching where we've come with electric outboards.
Mhm.
Don't think it's quite there just yet. I would love to see somebody hang one on there and do something with it and really kind of prove out, hey, this is a viable. But I just
Yeah.
haven't seen that yet. But I'm excited. I
Well,
can't wait for the first person that does it. I think it's going to be cool.
I agree with you, and I don't think that we are really selling it that well. And honestly, unfortunately, I'm probably going to put another nail into the coffin here. But what's the actual cost of this too? So, like to buy the outboard, buy the batteries, buy all the electric stuff. I mean, whenever you price that stuff out, we're probably like three times the cost of the
Yeah.
boat. Where it's like, wait a minute, like you could have
But
bought, the supply of fuel for the life of the boat could have been
could have been
purchased there.
exactly. But now imagine you're in a scenario where you're an avid angler. You want to get out on the water, and the body of water you want to fish on does not allow combustion engines.
Which there are
Those,
those. That's true. That was kind of my thought. You took it
yep,
right out of my brain where I was like, thinking of that situation and
yep.
yeah, 100, you're right. Like that's yeah.
Or bodies of water that are limited to 9.9 horsepower.
Yeah.
Then a 6 kilowatt electric one makes total sense because it's going to be a small body of water to begin with. My grandfather uh, passed away many years ago, but he had a house in Lake Placid, Florida, and it was on a lake, and that lake was limited to 9.9 horsepower. So, do you want to get out there and run a lawnmower engine basically, or maybe an electric one on a small lightweight skiff to do some little bass fishing? That might be the perfect solution for you.
Hmm.
So Yeah, you don't want to poo-poo it all. You know, you don't want to put a complete. You know, it's not really a nail in the coffin. It's just
Uh,
time and place. Is it the right time and the
yeah.
right place for it?
So let's move to customizations. So what would be the most creative thing that you've seen someone do on there? Like, are people like extending
Hmm.
polling platforms? Like what would you say is a something the most creative thing that you've seen someone do to like modify their skiff?
I've seen crazy and I've seen innovative. So I think you have to separate the two.
This is the
Crazy,
Florida man build or
crazy was somebody that made a what was affectionately and lovingly called the Cajun Tuna Tower, which was ran a big like a 9 foot step ladder on,
oh
and
no.
strapped it to the microskiff to be able to see further. Okay, that was unique. That was
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
I've seen that.
They're 60 feet away. You see that bonefish out there? I got
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, that was kind of but I think what I've seen that's been the most interesting is really come from the people that buy the boat. They go and they find a unique use case, and ultimately they turn that into a business. And we've seen that. So
Oh.
we've seen, and it may not even be something specifically on the boat, but really more products that help the average inshore, shallow water, flats, angler. A
Mhm.
lot of these products that you see, carbon, I would say carbon fiber has really been one of the areas where I've seen some unique things. So, um, multi-section push poles that are carbon fiber, right? Where you basically buy the sections and assemble your own push pole. I have a very popular brand push pole that's in my garage, and I've seen other carbon fiber ones where you buy it as a kit and assemble it for much less. So that does a couple of things. One, it's lightweight, it's less expensive. And it gets the person out on the water. Well, that was something that came out of MicroSkiffs, small shallow water boats.
Mhm.
A lot of these things that you see for fly fishermen, whether it's on the bow of the boat, they have the little cages that you can sit
Oh
in,
yeah, those little
or
like things that you put down around the to keep the line in the boat. Yeah.
the line tamers, so that it doesn't get caught up on cleats or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of things like that have really been interesting. They came out of a need where somebody said, "Boy, I bet you I could design something." For me, I think those are
Yeah.
the most interesting things, or the ones that I found that have been the most creative. The
Actually create a
problems
product that is now
the
they sell.
problems that turned into solutions that turned into a viable business product for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of what you see today, like the push pole holders and that type of stuff, they all had to come from somewhere. Somebody had an idea, like, wow, boy, if I could just hold my push pole here, and they started developing a product. A lot of the aluminum work. There's a company out of South Florida that's will post some pictures up on MicroSkiff, and they've done some really cool things with like take a popular brand name roto molded cooler that starts with Y. And he like builds armrests for it so that it can be in front of the console. So
Mhm.
it's a seat, it's a cooler, it's you get multiple uses at it, and I think that's the key. Again, that whole mantra that we had, sort of do more with less. Which, well, it's a cooler, it's a seat, it's also throw an aerator in it, it's a live well, it's
Mhm.
taking a very small space, maximizing the space, and coming up with unique or creative ideas to solve multiple problems um, in that small space. And I think that's what
Yeah.
really, for me, has been the most interesting thing to see over the years. So I wouldn't say it's one specific thing. I think it's really more about that creative, ingenuitive spirit that the small boat market created, where people ended up creating products to serve that market.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that because, yeah, I mean I like business, so I do think that that's cool where there's this environment that breeds creativity to allow people to better their lives, and having, a business, a passion. Like we were saying, if you enjoy something, then there's how many other people out there, they're going to enjoy it too. Or you have this problem that you now have solved the problem for all these other people. And you know, that's really cool. So
Yeah,
the aluminum work you're saying about, like, because I
the
know you
pipe work.
said that they're mainly fiberglass boats, but um do people so would an aluminum boat not be considered a micro skiff because it's aluminum versus the fiberglass? Or like, that
Yeah.
one, I'm not sure. Is that
So
a big
traditionally
debate or what is,
speaking,
I don't know. I don't know.
yeah,
I'm on the
yeah,
outside looking in here.
yeah, exactly. Once again, if we go back to the original definition, traditionally speaking, if you compare it, so how does a micro skiff compare to a flats boat? How does a micro skiff compare to a John boat? How does it compare to, quote, a traditional skiff? Micro skiffs compared to a flats boat, typically the micro skiff is going to be smaller, it's lightweight, it's run with much less power.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually lacks a lot of those sort of advanced things or bigger boat things that you see, drop in liners and finished hatches and, you
Yeah.
know, um, uh, 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 drains that run over the side. So self-bailing cockpits, things like that you
Mm-hmm.
can see on a flats boat, you won't see on a micro skiff. Traditionally speaking, and I'm going to carve out a little yes but in a moment here, but traditionally speaking, with John boats, they're square bowed, or you might have like the old the name's escaping me, kind of a Johnson style aluminum boat that has doesn't have a square bow on it. Um, those are traditionally considered John boats and not micro skiffs. Traditionally speaking, micro skiffs have been really fiberglass boats. But what I will say, especially now, there's a couple of manufacturers, three that I can think of off the top of my head. One that is in the Gulf states. I may get this wrong. I think either Texas or Louisiana, and I really feel bad because they build a beautiful boat that is a, quote, flat skiff that's all aluminum. There's another guy up in North Carolina that has a really beautiful all aluminum uh, flat skiff that is actually a Chris Morjon design. Going back to the original designer who designed all the Hell's Bays boats, he worked with this guy to design a Hell's Bay looking, if you will, a Chris Morjon design
But
aluminum
aluminum.
skiff. And it's really cool. In fact, I've been dying to get out and get on a ride on it. And then there's another one that's actually, I think, here in the South Carolina area that's also so what you're seeing is that the traditional definition of a micro skiff is beginning to get blended, excuse me, beginning to get blended in with aluminum built boats that begin to take a lot of the characteristics or to share some of that DNA with microskiffs that are now being built at an aluminum construction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you can even go back. There's an old, if you remember the Pathfinder 17T. This Pathfinder built boat, which was a tunnel hull, 17-foot boat. Now it had a 60 horsepower engine on it, but it was fiberglass, narrow, everything else. That was actually designed originally, or the original concept of it came from uh, a John boat that was a tunnel hull John boat that was 17 feet long. So that's kind of where, quote, a small skiff took its DNA from what was originally a John boat. And I think that manufacturer of John boats has come back. I've seen some things that looks like they've come back. So that's pretty cool. Um, so that's kind of how they would compare to John boat. And then finally, like a traditional skiff, Carolina skiff. Is a Carolina skiff a micro skiff? Eh,
Too
yes,
wide.
no. Traditionally speaking, again, there'll be people that'll comment, I'm sure. But traditionally speaking, a skiff, a traditional skiff, typically is a little bit larger, will have more freeboard. Micro skiffs will usually have very low freeboard. You get a 30 horsepower tiller and two average anglers sitting on the back of the microskiff, there's not a lot of water left. There's a lot of freeboard left there. It's pretty much underwater.
Uh,
And they're much lighter, much more maneuverable than quote a traditional skiff. So yes, you can get a traditional skiff that is 18 feet or less, 30 horsepower, but they'll typically have more freeboard. They'll be a little bit heavier, and they don't fit that original microskiff definition.
so what you're saying is now it's kind of transformed into you've you you've adopted the aluminum style, some aluminums, which I mean, aluminum, honestly, you would think because we are talking about really shallow. So you've got two benefits to both. So fiberglass, you got durability.
Yep.
Aluminum, you have easy repair. You can weld a patch on there. Like, there's, you bounce against something in aluminum, it just kind of bends it. You don't have to do no fiberglass repair. So
in one of my previous roles at a different company that I worked at before New Wire Marine, one of my German colleagues would say it's very robust. Aluminum is very robust. It can take a heck of a beating. You scrub up against an oyster bar and aluminum. You're like, all right. You do that with your fancy, $50,000 microskiff with gel coat, and you're like, oh man, the crunching almost. You can hear it, in your head. You're like, oh, the crunching.
You can see the gel coat going off the back.
Exactly. So I think there's what I have seen in the last several years is that there is a market for what I would call an aluminum microskiff, right? All of the DNA, all of the characteristics of what a microskiff is, but built out of aluminum. And now that I've been up here in South Carolina and started fishing these areas, it actually makes a lot of sense. There's times where I'm thinking, this egret is a little big and a little heavy to get into that creek. If I had a little aluminum microskiff, I could slide my way in, fish all day, and slide my way out, and not really give too much of a care to it. So it is interesting, right? So it's just this blending. It's kind of a development over time of the market, than this particular niche market in the general boating sphere.
Well, with all these different options, and now, because it's amazing that regionality to things plays a massive, like, obviously the deciding factor, right? Because I'm gonna ask you a question, but I'm gonna give you your disclaimer before asking the question. But because regionality plays massive factor. How far do you have to go? Where's your ramp? How shallow is the water? It's completely different. South Florida to South Carolina, you've got two different types of styles in fishing, and like you're saying, get in here. So, what would you say someone that's looking to, get into the microskiff world? What would they prioritize when looking to get one? Like, is it hull design? Is it the engine? Is it, the whatever? What do you think would be something for them to be like, obviously region is going to play a bigger part here, but like, what would you look at as far as like, the priority for getting one?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that is a very common question that comes up on MicroSkiff.
Okay.
If I were to pull the analytical data, behind the MicroSkiff forum, I would say that's one of the most common ones. And typically speaking, even region, it does play a huge part of it. But the first question that I typically will ask, so if somebody pops on the MicroSkiff and I have an opportunity to respond to their question of, hey, look, I'm looking for a MicroSkiff. What should I buy? I'm thinking about blah, 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 blah. The first question I will ask is, what are you going to do 80 to 90% of the time on that boat?
You're not going to ask them how much they weigh?
Number two, no. Number one, what are you going to do 80 to 90% of the time on that boat? Because that is really going to help anybody narrow down the choices. Well, I'm going to insert what they're going to do here. I'm going to take my family out, and I have, a wife and two growing sons. You know what? MicroSkiff isn't for you. You want a bigger boat. Because while you are intrigued and you like this idea and the lifestyle is bouncing around in your head, the reality is that's not the right boat for what you're going to do 80 to 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Me, why don't I own a microskiff? Well, when I was in South Florida, I was running 30, 40, 50, 70 miles a day. Yes, I could do it in a microskiff, but I could also do it a lot easier and a lot more comfortable in a flats boat.
Hmm.
So it really wasn't 100% the right boat for me. So again, what are you going to do 80% and 90% of the time? If you're going to say, hey, I'm going to fish shallow backwater areas, then my question is okay, what type of shallow backwater areas do you have? Oh, well, I live in Texas. Great. You're going to want something with a tunnel. You're going to want to get that
Mm.
engine as high as possible so that you can run the distances, because you're going to have to cover a lot of really shallow water that's basically just mud. Well, I live in, Miami. Okay, great. You're going to probably want to cross Biscayne Bay when it's good, or you're
Hmm.
going to want to go into the backcountry. Well, then that's going to be a different. So really, what you're going to do with the boat most of the time is the number one question to answer. And from there, regionality, conditions, that begins to narrow down the choices.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's it's almost like the first question you ask anybody that wants to buy a boat, period. Like,
Yeah.
what do you plan on doing with a boat? Like that's I didn't even, I probably should have even maybe stopped to think about what I was even asking because yeah, that's
But
number
that
one.
actually is one of the most common questions that we typically see. And again, it's if you can answer that 80 to 90% question, what are you gonna do 80 to 90% of the time? That will help point you in the right direction. Then it comes to regionality, and then other factors come in. But if it's you know, I want to fish Mosquito Lagoon by myself and I live on the water, yeah, microskiff would be great for you. Little Ginu would be
Hmm.
perfect. Oh, and I have this budget. I have a budget
Oh
of
yeah, that
under
yeah.
$10,000. A used Ginu would be perfect for you.
Okay, so let's go back to the some of the different weight topics. I think there's like, two or three different things that we can get in from, the weight distribution and performance, and what are you willing to give up sacrifice wise, like, for that weight, like which direction you want to go with it. What would you say the first topic would be to talk about as far as weight and weight in the microskiff?
I think the first topic is understanding the sensitivity to weight.
Okay, yeah, I
And,
like
and
that. I
I'll,
like
I'll
that.
give a great example. So I did a whole on my YouTube channel and on MicroSkiff. I did a whole in-depth review and video of the impact of taking two AGM batteries out of my boat. Each one of the batteries weighed, I think they each weighed 80 pounds apiece. So my boat had
Yeah.
three AGM batteries, 12 volt for the starting, and then two AGMs for the trolling motor. I took both of those out at about 80 pounds apiece and replaced it with a uh, 24 volt lithium ion battery, 50 amp hours, perfect for all the needs I needed. And that battery weighed, I think, half of what one of the AGM batteries. And I
Mm-hmm.
apologize, I
Yeah.
don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head. I basically took nears makes no difference, almost or just over 100 pounds out of my boat. Now, if I were to ask you, if you took 100 pounds out of your boat, how much shallower do you think you'll draft?
3 inches.
Less than an inch.
Really?
Less than an inch. I have a very wide beamed, shallow, flats boat, and I took 100 pounds out from underneath the seat, and it made literally, I think it was about three quarters. It was less than an inch total of draft difference. I was shocked.
Wow.
I was stunned. I have all the pictures. I have tape on the boat where I had all the batteries in. I took all the batteries out. I put the you know
You got all the data. Yeah,
I
yeah.
have all the data. It was literally three quarters of an inch.
Wow. See, that's very surprising to me because so
Me
then how does
too.
that um well then how does that I mean, because I don't really know, engineer that kind of stuff, but like as far as like the okay, so the beam, the length, I guess
It's all
being
about
that it's not a
displacement.
microskip, huh?
It's all about displacement. So you do basic calculations saying I have so much hull in the water and I have so much weight in that hull, and water weighs, salt water weighs X per pound, and you can, back of the barroom napkin type of thing, you can do a pretty quick calculation of what it'll do. Now, let's translate that to a microskiff. Let's imagine we're talking about the strict definition of a microskiff: 18 feet or less, uh, 30 horsepower, 70-inch or less beam. That same 100 pounds placed at the stern would probably be 2.5 inches. If I took 100 pounds and put it right at the stern of a microskiff, it would probably be a good 2.5 inches easily that it would draw, additional water. It
Hmm.
would draw at the stern at rest. If I move that 100 pounds to the bow, well, it's not going to be as much because you have, traditionally speaking, the engine and everything is in the back. A lot of times people even put the gas tank in the back, but most manufacturers will put it up in the bow.
Yeah.
Even that 100
Yeah.
pounds up at the bow doesn't make the same 2+ inch difference in draft because of how the balance is. So a microskiff is very sensitive to weight, placement, and balance. So where I put that weight or how I move that weight around will have a
Hmm.
significant impact. Where in my flats boat, it didn't have that big of an impact, which again, it was a surprise to me because I spent all this money going, yay. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, you're like all excited, like, yeah, I'm gonna get all this. I'm gonna, take 3 inches off my draft. Like, this is gonna be great. And then you're like,
yeah,
oh,
oh
all
man,
that work.
exactly. But I mean, there was other reasons to go to lithium, which I put in my, uh, in my video and everything and talk about.
Yeah.
But again, coming back to a microskiff, it does make a big difference. So what you put in it and where you put it will really translate to how well the boat will perform. And you want the boat to perform differently in two different conditions. When it's at rest and you're poling it. So I'm going to imagine you have typical boat, right? An angler and a poler, so somebody that's poling and somebody that's fishing.
Hmm.
So two people on the board of the boat, tackle, cooler, gas tank. I'm going to remove for a moment trolling motor and a battery. So very lightweight, stripped down. Well, when you are running the boat, you want to get as much of the hull out of the water as possible to have the best possible efficiency for the best speed. Well, you really want to probably have, and it's hard because you've got to get the boat up onto plane, but you want to probably have everybody from center backwards. You want to have all that weight basically midship back because you don't want too much weight up on the front because that's going to push the front down, put more wetted
Bow
surface in the
plow.
water, and it will slow you down. Now, you come to a stop. What do you want to do? Now, what you want to do is you want to shift as much weight forward of the midship point because you need to offset how much weight the engine is plus the person pulling. So it
Mm.
on a microskiff, if you really want to tweak and tune it, you really do have to play with the weight and where you put it, whether you're at run or at rest.
Almost
Most
making
people
it
just
movable. Like, you need to be able to move your weight. Once you get to where you're going, you almost need to move stuff.
you do, and let's imagine a small little lightweight skiff that has a cooler on it. Well, when I'm running, I'll have the cooler further back, and maybe having somebody sitting on it, especially if it's a tiller, right? So if it's a tiller, one person on the back because you need to have that space to be able to move the tiller, and then
Hmm.
the passenger will be kind of in front of you. But then once you come to rest, move that cooler to the front, or use the cooler as a casting platform so that the angler
Mm.
now has a raised position to cast from. So,
Hmm.
I mean, that's a good example of being able to have something to move the weight around. When it comes to electronics and stuff, the weight of a typical 12-inch, 7 to 12-inch GPS isn't going to make that big a difference. It's really
Yeah.
the biggest impact to the performance of a microskiff is all the squishy stuff. people, you know, so where you put people, how they sit. Sometimes you have to get them to go a little bit forward to get the boat, up on the plane and then move back
Uh-huh.
so that that's basically what you have to do.
That really kind of makes a lot of sense when you're talking about, because some stuff is not movable. I guess you can move the fuel tank around, you can move the cooler around. For the most part, the fuel tank's probably not going to be movable. I don't know. Are most of the fuel tanks like just the red cans, or like are they like on a flats boat where it's an aluminum tank in the front of the boat?
That's where it comes to price point. So let's say a higher end, higher dollar um, uh, micro skiff. Let's say you buy an Ancona or an East Cape. Those almost always come with aluminum tanks that are built in, purpose built. You move to, let's say, something a little less expensive, like the Ginu, um, and that's going to be usually the little jerry can.
What so what would you say is the worst mistake you've seen someone make as far as like weight distribution goes?
Trying to put a tournament sized release well in the back of a microskiff. So
Oh,
30 plus gallon release well in the back of a microskiff.
it's a lot of
That's
weight.
probably one of it's great when it's empty, but when you fill it
Yeah,
full of
yeah, when it's
water and two
empty.
anglers, you're just going to be plowing.
If not, almost sinking your boat.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Again, very low freeboard.
I think that's good enough, Jan. I think we can wrap it up there. This has been a blast for me. I learned a ton, and I'm sure everybody else had a blast too. I didn't know you had a YouTube channel, so definitely go ahead and check out Jan. But also, like we said, he's director marketing of New Wire Marine, which everybody knows I like newwiremarine.com. So check them out too. Other than that, you guys have a great week, and thank you, Jan, for being a part of this.
Thank you very much for your time.
Hey there, sorry to take you away from the video, but real quick, did you know that on average a boat owner will spend between $1,000 and $5,000 a year just on servicing their engine? And you could actually pocket and save a lot of that money if you would just do the service yourself. It might seem like a daunting task, but I guarantee you virtually everyone can do it with our guidance and the Boaters program. This is just one skill that you could learn inside the program because we have hundreds of other videos teaching you all kinds of boating skills, as well as a weekly live stream where we have questions and answers with me, as well as a chat feature where you can send videos and pictures, ask all kinds of questions, or look for some advice or some guidance on a project that you're doing on your boat. You can join the program by hitting the first link in the description, clicking join, or visiting bornagainboating.com. Now back to the video.